All right, hi everyone. I am so excited to be here. I feel so privileged to be here invited today, and I'm really excited to share. And I even hit the right button, so off to a good start. All right, today I'm going to talk a bit about the vital role that really UX research plays when we look at AI experiences, looking a bit back over the years too at ServiceNow. This is our ServiceNow logo and motto, kind of. The world works with ServiceNow. I like it here because we also think then if the world's working with ServiceNow, we're helping people work. How does AI fit into that? And going back to the people. So a quick bit about me. My name is Jessa, and I am a manager of our AI ML UX research team at ServiceNow. But that was a recent transition. For nearly 4 years, I've been conducting and leading our UX research in this space. And I wanted to bring up that I do not have a formal background and training in AI and machine learning. And that's going to be kind of a theme you're going to see throughout here is I think everyone here can do UX research in our AI experiences and offer really valuable vision and role. So what I like to say is that I'm a champion of humans and looking how can we solve real world problems through human and technology collaboration. The technology does not always have to be AI, and that is something to think about too. Let's make sure we're solving for humans' real problems and needs. So we have a lot on the agenda today. You've actually already heard a lot about some of the differences between classic and generative AI, but I'm going to touch on it really briefly again, just to reinforce it. And then I want to talk a bit about what we already know about UX research and AI in humans. And then looking forward, what looks a bit different with generative AI and UX research in humans at this point, recognizing, as everyone has said, this is a rapidly evolving space. Expectations are changing, experiences are changing. So take that as well. Some takeaways that you can do. So if you're going to go get started on UX research with AI products, there's a lot you can do that you already have the skills and resources for. And then some time for questions. So first, classic versus generative AI. I like this visual of a puzzle being assembled into a known piece of work, like Starry Night, versus someone painting a fresh painting that has not been created before, but is influenced by what they've experienced and is around them. So traditional or classic AI machine learning, really what we've heard and you saw in the first talk, the strength is really in pattern recognition, making predictions. So you can think about how it learns from data, both structured and unstructured, to make these predictions. So it might be, what is the next best puzzle piece to put into my puzzle I'm building? It might be helping sort out which puzzle pieces belong to which different piece of art, and then assembling it into, again, a known piece of art. But it's not generating and creating entirely new content. You all have very likely interacted with this type of AI, even if you did not know it. Right? It's things like Netflix and Spotify that are creating these curated recommendations for you, or the next recommendations for words when you're texting or writing an email. These are all examples where it's very good at predicting. In contrast, generative AI is creating that new content. It can be images, text, code, audio, ServiceNow workflows. And what it's doing is learning from really massive amounts of data to generate these novel outputs. And so this is why I like to say it's like painting on a blank canvas, right? And just like a human artist would be painting on the canvas, they're not doing it in a vacuum devoid of every experience they've ever had. They're doing it based on their experiences around the world and what they've lived through, right? And similar, it's learning from all the data that it was immersed in. So those inputs that lead to those outputs that we heard. And what we're seeing that's so exciting and different is how it can produce these realistic and coherent content, and often using natural language. So if any of you have used something like ChatGPT, you can put in your natural language, a question or a prompt, and get just a single answer back. So it's a very cool, exciting space. And like you've heard many examples of ChatGPT, Bard, Midjourney, etc. But even though there are these differences and it feels like something's different, to most people, we're finding that AI is still just AI. They may feel that, hey, AI can do something more. It's this new thing that we're hearing about all the time. But in the reality, they aren't necessarily distinguishing between these technical differences, right? And most of the time, I would argue they probably don't need to know if it was formed by an LLM or if we were using just a nice classification model, if it's helping them accomplish their task and adding value and they could feel in control and trust it. And so that ties me into what do we already know then when we talk about UX research for AI and humans? So there's a massive field, and you've already heard from a lot of great people in this field, but human-centered AI and responsible AI, right, is really, when it comes down to it, about building a collaborative relationship between technology and people. And this I got from one of my colleagues, but ensuring that the AI is worthy of human trust. So bringing that lens to it too. Not only should we build AI that humans can trust, we want to make sure it's worthy of their trust. This is something that's adding value to them, solving a real problem, and is not endangering or giving any risks either. It would be a whole course on this, so I'm not going to actually dive into deep about human-centered AI. But what I am going to talk about is what we know from years of working with our AI solutions across many different users and personas, is that trust is foundational. These are 6 simplified factors that we look at and think about as we go through the experiences. I want to call out they are not mutually exclusive, and there's not necessarily a right or wrong way to apply these. The goal is to think through these when you're looking at creating or evaluating experiences that you can bring into. So for example, human oversight is often simplified as human in the loop. And this can be at more of the systems level when people are setting up and implementing it and making sure there's places where human checks have to happen, or it can be the actual person using it who has to review it before it goes into their workflow, for example, and give that human oversight an okay. Transparency in human-centered AI is actually a very large bucket that I've just simplified into transparency. It includes things like traceability, interpretability, many other things. But for the sake of this, we can think of it as, do people know they're using AI? Are they able to see potentially the sources, for example, of it? Feedback contestability. So this is a big one where we want to say, let's go beyond a thumbs up and thumbs down. But how do we make sure that the human, the user, feels that they can challenge the AI or correct it if it was wrong? And this will actually also improve the AI as well if it gets that feedback. But it's also a really powerful thing for that human to know they have the ability to do that and correct it, rather than just a thumbs up and thumbs down, which could be kind of vague. Is that saying, is it helpful or not? Was it right? Was it wrong? Right? So really giving them that ability. Explainability is another kind of big bucket one. And there's sometimes 2 lenses from it. One lens is the much more technical data science lens, which is really helping through mathematical and algorithmic means peering into that black box that we've heard so much about. But on the side of UX and how we are often using it and bringing it into experiences, we're looking at explainability more from the side of, is there a way to help users see into the black box a little bit? So that could be giving them the little info icon so they can learn about how it was created, what's the purpose of it. It could be having that explain more, right? There's a way for them to start using it in the experience themselves. So we look at it really both ways. Guardrails is also a big one. This one often comes up more in that early system setup level. So we have some users who are the implementers of these AI solutions for their customers. And so they may need some guardrails if they don't have AI training and expertise. So for example, maybe they're selecting data, training data to train a model. This would be for let's say classification or clustering model. So in that classic AI, and they have to select the data. We can think of ways to give flags in it. For example, saying, hey, we don't recommend selecting zip code. That's often a proxy for race, and that can lead to bias. So you can think of ways you put up guardrails to help people make these informed decisions too. And finally, control. This one, I would say, is the one that we hear time and time again from all of our users and personas, and in their own words, is they want to be in control. They want to be in that driver's seat, if you will, and be the captain of their experience. Not to say, looking forward, that at some point they don't relinquish some of that control or take their hands off the wheel sometimes if they've gained trust and it's appropriate based on the technology, the risks, et cetera. but initially they really do want to be in control. And one thing we've seen is that in the context of their work versus their personal life, this may be especially relevant too, where they are using it on a very regular basis and they're accountable for the output. They have a heightened desire to have control and build that trust, which versus, for example, if they're using an app by choice once every day, that might be a different level of control or expectation they have with it. So that's something to think about too. So you've heard me talk about, well, there's differences by people. And this is not new to any of you, not breaking news. Personas really, really do matter. So these are a few starter questions, not at all an exhaustive list. But I wanted to call them out because this is something that's really important to think through early on in your experiences when you start to look at AI. And they're a little different than maybe the questions you normally use. So one would be, as I brought up, we have users who are very different. Some are responsible for setting up and configuring an AI solution, but they are not data scientists and they do not have AI background or expertise. So their needs are going to be different. And the factors that we have to lean into, like guardrails and explainability, we may have to really lean in hard into those and making sure they have the control, ability to drill down and gain the trust. These might be really important there. Versus if the others are using them and their AI generated outputs in their daily work on a daily basis, what we lean into and build in may be less prioritized. So we might really lean hard into transparency there, making sure they know it's from AI and they have the human oversight to review it. Another is, what are the risks and consequences if the AI is wrong? This is a really, really important one to think about, and do it with your group and your cross-functional team. You all have different perspectives to bring to it. We recommend making, just a classic matrix of these trade-offs, right? And this is if it's wrong for the individual person using it, as well as what's maybe the next step up, what's the bigger context or system level implication if it's wrong or if there's a consequence. And certain industries and domains may have higher risks with this. Healthcare, right? Perhaps would have a higher one. The self-driving cars may has a higher one too, right? So there's certain factors you have to do. So everyone's gonna have different trade-offs and ways they balance that. And then finally, does my user have a realistic expectation for AI? Do they know when they should use it? Do they know what it is good for? What it's going to help them for? What it isn't a good fit for? These are all really important considerations that we'll need to think through. And if they don't have that, how do you build that into the experience to help them build that mental model and know how to best use AI and interface with it? Because ultimately, if they don't know how to use it and don't build trust with it, then they're not going to accept it and they're not going to use it. So let me give you an example of ServiceNow. So one of our personas, we have a bunch, but one of them is an agent who would be using this in their daily work. So here they are, they're creating a new case in their workspace. And initially what happened was an email came in from a customer and it was converted into a case automatically for them, which saves the agent time. And then it autofills certain fields. So calling out a few of the factors, again, they're not mutually exclusive. So we have an alert that says, hey, check the AI field predictions in your case and replace any that aren't correct. So giving them a flag that they need to check these. There's the transparency. Each of the fields that has AI is labeled with AI. And then explainability, they all have the info icon they can click to go into and learn. And it actually will tell them like, hey, this was trained on XYZ fields, for example. In addition, they have the long description, which was from the email that is there, so they can go review that as well and make sure. And this is when it was auto-filled for them. There's a different view that the implementer, that person who decides how they want to roll this out, may choose, which would be, hey, we don't want to autofill it, we just want to recommend it. And if so, it looks a little different for them. So here you'd see the slides are called out with AI, but the fields are blank until the person actually goes in and clicks it and sees the AI field recommendations in order, and then they have to click it and have control over it in that way. So it's a bit different of a scenario, and we give the recommendations and control to the people who are rolling out and implementing which way they think their agents want to use it too. And this was both examples of classic AI. But what are we seeing that's different about generative AI and UX research? And I will say I am seeing some differences. The biggest one is and this was always the case, AI is not always correct, right? We've already heard, just like humans, AI is also probabilistic. So it's not deterministic. It's not if X, always Y, right? If X, then most likely Y. And with generative AI, this concept of accurate or right or perfection gets extra tricky. So humans, we often like to think like, hey, AI is just right or it's wrong, right? But in reality, there's a lot of ways that AI generated content can be imperfect or inaccurate. So you've heard a few people bring up the term hallucinations. I'm sure a lot of you already know this, but in the most simple form, it's that it can literally generate information and responses that do not accurately represent reality. And the worrisome thing is they can present it in a very confident way that you may not know this is not actually correct if you do not have the wherewithal that A, you should check, B, to know how to check. So that is a big risk. Another is missing information. It just may not include all the information sometimes. So if we're looking at like a summarization where it's summarizing a long email, it sometimes can leave out things that we as a human might think, hey, that was actually really important to have in there. I really wanted that. It can also misinterpret data. So, and report it then incorrectly as well. It could interpret it in the wrong way, like which we were testing with some agents, an example where it's like, oh, it read the request leave for parental leave as paternity, the non-birthing parent, versus maternal, the birthing parent, right? So it can misinterpret things, and there could be consequences if you proceed through that without double checking. So this is a big difference with generative AI. But this ties in more to a challenge, which is the idea of truth is usually highly subjective. So outside of math, there really are few absolutes, and we are bringing our own multiple lens to how we interpret the world. I listed a few of the lens, and these are literally just a few. There are so many different lens and experiences that we interpret the world, and thus what we deem to be true. And so as we look at generative AI that's generating this content, we need to think about how people are then interpreting it. Even if you think of like a courtroom, right, who is using like the Constitution or something, they lean heavily on precedents and prior things, right? There isn't just necessarily a single clear truth always. There's a lot of different ways to interpret. And so that's one of the reasons that it can be very hard to say how right or wrong a generated output is, because a lot of that will depend on the viewer. And so that is one of the things that in UX research, we are trying to explore and understand with the current expectations and understanding from people when they interact with it and how they want to review and say, hey, this is true or not, this is good enough, I want to correct, etc. And how different that can look in different contexts and domains. But there are still things you can do. Yay. So one of the biggest things is help them set these expectations. You're building their mental model, right? A lot of them haven't used generative AI, haven't had this experience before. So you're building this new mental model for them. So you can help them set realistic expectations and again, stay in control. So it's still those 6 factors I talked about, they still apply. There's just kind of a doubling down in certain areas where we really want to make sure, at least in the current state that it's in right now, that the human is in control, is the captain, right? AI is augmenting them and helping them. And again, in the context of work, where they're on the hook and accountable, this is especially important. So that means we often have to think about where we want to explicitly draw attention to where human review is needed and give them that opportunity to provide that feedback too. This will not only help improve the model, but again, help them understand how to use it and gain trust in it and see how it still can add value to them as a helpful augmenter, if you will. I'm calling out this thing on the bottom. This goes against a lot of what we've traditionally done in UX and UX research. We look to remove friction. We look to make it as smooth and fast as possible. In this scenario, I'm just saying, think about if you want to maybe actually add some controlled friction in the experience and slow people down. There can be big consequences if they overly trust and overly rely on it and don't even know it could be wrong. And again, this isn't their work, or there's certain industries and domains. So we want to think that right now, maybe in this really early state, we might be bringing in a slightly different lens and view, which is saying, hey, let's pump the brakes a little, draw their attention here, let them know this came from AI. We're not sure if it's right. They need to look at it. We still need them. This can also, we think, help show them how AI is helping them work versus replacing them. So we think it could be a bit of a win-win. I also can't share any of our really cool, exciting generative AI designs that we are helping inform, maybe next year. But I know we've all seen ChatGPT, or most of us have probably seen ChatGPT. And so I want to call out, they even are setting some of these expectations. So they have transparency in terms of, hey, what is this model you're working in? What's it good for? They give examples of how to get started. And they do call attention that it may be inaccurate. And when you first start, they even have a different 4-box flag saying like, hey, this is training, this is learning, might be inaccurate, give us feedback, etc. So there's some ways that we're seeing that generative AI, people are starting to set and work on putting in patterns, but it's all such a new space. So again, I'm sorry I can't share ours, but it's very cool. Like everyone else said. So I have a few takeaways for you. This is a very heavy slide, sorry, there's a lot on it. I won't speak through each and every one. But the first one I want to say is learn. We're all researchers, we love to learn, we love to research. This should not be any different. So be curious, ask questions, go read things, start with why. Are you solving a real problem? Is this a real world problem? And does it need AI to solve it? Let's start there. And then, like I said, there's a lot of great existing human-centered AI best practices and resources that you can lean into and kind of help build your repertoire in that space. And then think about gaining kind of a loose technical understanding of the AI lifecycle and technology. Like I said, I am not a data scientist, I'm not formally trained in it, but I ask questions and I read and I try to get up to speed to have enough of a conversation where I can feel informed when I ask my questions to our engineers and our data scientists and our AI researchers. So that's a common theme you're going to see in this one is ask questions. Another is, again, you all know this, but know your users and your needs and really understand where your users' expectations are with AI already so you can know where you have to modify the experience to help create this mental model. And if they only have, let's say, used previously Netflix and recommendations there, their mental model of how they would use AI, especially in like a work context, may be very, very different, right? So think about how you bring that into an experience and really be clear on communicating to your product team what these user needs are and what their understanding is. We found that so helpful to give it to them up front early on. There might be some assumptions that everyone is drinking this ChatGPT and generative AI Kool-Aid and they all know this. And that may not be the reality for what they're designing and creating products for. So help them know. I like to build trust and try your best to do no harm. So think about, again, what are the consequences if AI is wrong? Do a workshop with your core team to think through this. There isn't a right or wrong answer either. It's really to generate that discussion and start thinking about it across the whole AI lifecycle. So you've heard other people bring up the training data, right? Is it biased? Is this something we should be aware of? Do we have to let our users maybe know this? These are questions you can and should feel empowered to ask. The edge cases sometimes are really important to think about too. We'd be like, oh, we don't need to worry about that. That's only if it goes really wrong. But that might be something we do need to worry about or build in a guardrail to at least try to prevent that from happening. And again, just work transparently. So transparency for everything, right? So communicate early, often, and elevate that user experience. Test early and with your users, and often do that iterative cycle like we just saw some great examples for. And finally, if you only take away this, it's that we strive to ensure our AI experiences we create are worthy of our humans trusting it. So you can do this if you just take 2 key things. It's set the expectations for people, help them build that mental model, guide them on what to do, make sure they're getting value from it. It's actually solving their problems, right? And helping them, let them know what AI is good at. And then transparency across the board. That's kind of the motto here. So the users have to know they're interacting with AI, not a human. That's just fundamental now. And then you want to encourage and enable that feedback. And if you see a risk, or if you aren't sure, or you have a question, speak up. Ask your team, ask someone. It's never going to be a bad thing to do that, and it shows you care. So I hope you feel empowered. This is from our CEO at ServiceNow. And we love this quote. Trust is the ultimate human currency. You earn it in drops, you lose it in buckets. And in the space of AI, this is especially relevant and important. And so we always say, how can we help build up this trust? So we want to make sure all the experiences we're building with AI are building towards that trust. All right.